In this video, I would like to show you one of my favorite games I have ever seen. We all love games with sacrifices, but normally a game consists of like one sacrifice, maybe a second one, but not much more. But this particular game has at least 7 peace sacrifices. It's absolutely amazing, and I'm sure that in the next 20 minutes or so, you are really going to enjoy yourself. So before we are going to watch this video, just make sure to subscribe to the channel if you would like to see more attacking games like this. Let's have a look at the game Serper against Nikoloidis. White started here with a move 1c4, g6, and after e4, bishop to g7, from an English opening, we transposed back into the King's Indian. After knight c3, knight f6, we have the starting position of the King's Indian. A lot of different ways for both sides are here. White is occupying the center with 3 nice pawns, but black is trying to challenge it. Here White went for the remarkable idea of playing knight ge2. It's one of these sidelines with the idea to bring the knight to g3. I'm not sure the knight itself is that well placed on g3, but there are some advantages as well. We will get to see it later. First things first, black played knight bd7 instead of the more common move castling. I think maybe watching this game you will understand that black may have considered castling instead of playing this move. But we continue with the game. Knight g3, black went for the move c6, and instead of challenging the center with a move like e5, which is so common for these King's Indian structures, black goes for a different plan. As with the move c6, bishop e2, black decides to ignore the center and try to challenge the pawn on c4 very soon by bringing up the pawn to b5. First white went bishop e3, black goes h5, which has the idea of challenging the knight on g3. So here we see one of the downsides having that knight on g3. Understandably, white plays here the move f3 to secure the pawn on e4 one more time. And in case the knight will get kicked away with the move h4, the knight can come back into play via f1 to d2. But you see, white is spending a lot of time. On the other hand, black has not made that many useful developing moves. A lot of pawn moves in general. And therefore, it's just a very interesting position already. Black goes b5 with the idea of taking the pawn on c4 and try to challenge the center. But white is not going to cooperate and plays here the move c5, trying to get a nice grip on black's position, and particularly black will be struggling to find a nice spot for its bishop to be developed to. Black decided to take the pawn, d takes c5, d takes c5, and now the move queen c7 was played. It was still not too late for black to kick the knight away. I think that would have been a useful move because white would have been forced to drop back with a knight to f1. And that will take additional time for white to regroup its pieces to bring the king into safety. Now in the game, after the move queen to c7, white castled, and only now black decided to go here for the move h4. But now knight h1 is a very strange looking move, but very typical for a lot of King's Indian structures with a pawn on f3. White center is perfectly supported by its own pieces, and the knight will come back into the game very soon. Black decided to go here for the move knight to h5 with the idea of playing bishop e5 next and try to create some play along these dark squares. Together with the queen, bishop and knight, black would have fantastic control. But white goes for queen d2. Excellent move, so that in case of bishop e5, we are able to meet that move with the move f4. And now the pawn on f4 is just 3 times defended by queen, bishop and rook. The bishop will be forced to come back to its original square. Therefore, black instead went here for the move e5, closing the center. But the idea is that after white plays knight f2, that you do have some nice squares for your knight. So for instance, a A plan like knight f4 is a move I would like to see, and maybe the knight can even come back later to e6, so that you're undermining the pawn on c5 with both your knights. And typically for King's Indian positions, the knight also will get a nice outpost on d4 with the support of the pawn on e5 and the bishop on g7. So I think that would have been a very nice plan. Instead, the move played in the game also does make quite some sense, as the move knight f8 was played. But the big problem is that there are now two pieces on c8 and f8 fighting for one square. So here you see also the lack of space black is suffering from. And keep in mind, the black king is still in the center. And therefore, white attempts here to open up the position by playing the move a4, putting a lot of pressure on that pawn on b5. And, well, the big threat is to take twice on b5, so that the rook on a8 is unprotected. So black has to do something about that pawn on b5. If you would take on a4, this is just positionally speaking absolutely horrible. White is going to recapture with its knight. The knight will come into b6, which is a fantastic square to attack the rook. The pawn on a6 is weak, which is targeted by both the rook and the bishop on e2. So therefore black decided to keep the position close, believing that the knight will be forced now to go back to an inferior square, maybe to b1 or d1 or a2. Not sure what black was exactly thinking, but very likely he underestimated white's next move, knight to d5. And what is happening? White is placing its knight in the center, where it can just be captured by the pawn on c6. But you're attacking the queen. Black cannot ignore it, otherwise the knight will come into b6 anyway. So c takes d5, and white just recaptures with the pawn. It's just a positional piece sacrifice. And are there immediate threats? No, but you do have very nice pawns in the center, connected passed pawns, which can be pushed, and especially the queen will get in trouble. And why is this piece sacrifice correct? Well, black is unable to mobilize all its pieces. So if we look at purely at black's pieces at this point, king is in the center, knight is on f8, the rooks are still on their initial squares, the bishop doesn't have a great square to go to. And what is white going to do? How is white going to prove its compensation? Well, there are ideas also to come in with a knight from f2 to e4, maybe to d6. You can place your rooks behind these pawns and start pushing these pawns. So very likely at some point you are going to win back some material. Black decided to play here the move f5 to prevent that knight from coming in to e4. The pawn covers that square. But now white goes for d6. Very concrete play, attacking the queen. And you see these pawns are marching forward. The queen will have to block the pawns in some way. So therefore the move queen to c6 was played. But I want to show you, if you go queen d7, then there's this remarkable pawn break, c6, attacking the queen. If you do take the pawn, there's rook to c1, hitting the queen. And the queen doesn't have many good squares to go to. If it goes back to d7, we enter with a bang, as the queen is under threat. If the queen goes away, we have rook e7. Look how quickly white's major pieces are able to infiltrate. And even if we go back a few moves, instead of the move queen to d7, if you would go queen b7, doesn't make much of the difference, as the rook is about to enter on c7, hitting the queen. Queen has to go back, rook e7, check, look at this pawn. And if you go king to d8, there's not an immediate killer blow, but there is queen d5. And look at black's pieces, they're absolutely paralyzed. They cannot leave the back rank. White has ideas of entering with the queen on f7, creating mating threats at the same time. Maybe bishop g5 is an option as well. It's absolutely game over. That means that instead of the move queen d7, black is advised here to block these pawns, at least to block the c pawn, so that the file remains closed and white is unable to infiltrate with its rook. May seem as if everything is under control because black is having quite a nice grip on the light squares, the bishop and the knight. They are covering these light squares as white's pawns are placed on dark squares. But the next move may have come as another shock, as there follows the second piece sacrifice of the game, bishop to b5. It's a skewer on the queen and king. White is giving up its bishop, but very soon we are able to infiltrate with our pieces, because now after capturing a takes b5, the queen is under threat. And if the queen moves, you got to reckon with rook takes a8. That's the main point of sacrificing the bishop. If you keep the rook protected, the c-pawn is coming even further, attacking the queen one more time. And if you go queen b8, well, there are various moves, but queen d5 is a very interesting move, but also something like b6. I cannot recall having seen games in which you have 3 pawns on the 6th rank, so many threats, you're 2 pieces down, but there are ideas with playing d7, c7 or b7. This is looking absolutely dangerous for black. So therefore, black decided to take the pawn on b5, giving up the rook on a8. So now the material is a rook versus 2 minor pieces. White is threatening to take this bishop. So the queen comes back, blocking the pawns and covering the bishop. But the other rook will join the action as well. It's protecting its colleague. But it does allow the move f4. And you see, this bishop on e3 doesn't have any squares to go to. It will always be taken. But we have a higher goal in mind, and that's very typical for play with piece sacrifices. We are playing for the initiative, and we are looking at ways to approach the black king. And now the move rook 1 to a7 is a fantastic idea, because if you would take the bishop here, then you have these 2 rooks. It's almost looking like it's going to be a ladder mate. But the queen is still a very important defender. But with this move, queen d5, you're threatening to take the queen, deflecting the queen, as if black is taking on d5. It's rook takes c8 with checkmate. No time to take the queen. Even if you play first e takes f2 with check, it's king takes f2, and there's not much black can do to maintain the blockade. After queen takes d5, it's mate again. So therefore the bishop cannot be taken yet. Black played here the move knight to d7, so that the knight is blocking the 7th rank, and the same motive with queen d5 doesn't work, as the king can always escape after white would capture on c8. But now, critical moment, because how are we going to give the attack a new impulse? It seems as if black is having everything under control. Look at this move. Third sacrifice. Rook takes c8. With check, attacking the queen. Black has no choice but has to take. And now the main point is to enter with the queen on d5. Still the bishop is hanging, and the bishop was actually taken in the game. There's not much else you can do, because the queen is likely to enter on e6, or if the knight is going to move away so that the queen will cover that square, the white queen can even enter on f7, as that opens up the rank for the rook on a7. So for instance, if you play f takes e3, the queen comes into to e6. Very nice move. With check, if it gets king d8, it's checkmate on e7. So that is not possible. King has to go to f8. And now you can give a check on e7, but the king is delighted to run away if given the chance, so that it will be surrounded by its own pieces again. But very nice move here. Rook takes d7. We are capturing a piece with a huge mating threat on f7. But black, before solving the threat, captures another time a piece. This time it's e takes f2 with check. And now, be precise. If you do take with a king, that would allow the move queen takes c5 with check. And all of a sudden, the black queen is able to give a lot of checks. You have to be careful where you go with your king. If you go king e2, it would run into knight f4 check. And all white's pieces are gone as the queen will be taken next. Therefore, you got to be very precise and just make sure that the king will not come into a check on the next move. There is this move, king f1. You have to block the pawn. And now you're for a choice as black. Are you opting for a defense by controlling the f7 square, or are you looking for a counterattack? If you go for the counterattack with queen a6, you have to take the pawn. Now the key defense would be queen e2 check. Another amazing sacrifice. By the way, this is not a game to avoid any confusion. If you do take the queen, it's knight f4, and after king f1, knight takes e6. All of a sudden, black is 2 pieces up. But white's passed pawns, they're way too strong. You can play here the move c6 with a big threat just to break through with that pawn. If you try here to move king e8, I'm going to play rook e7 with a double attack. If the king goes there, it's rook takes e6, and this king is still in a very bad situation. This is technically winning for white because these pawns are really, really strong. For instance, if you would go rook e8, I'm going to play c7 with check. If you go king d7, then we are able to take, and after king takes, we get a new queen. Instead of king e8, if you go with your king to the other side, try to run away so that the 8 rank will be opened up for the rook. It's rook e7 anyway. Very precise move, trying to force the knight to go away. And if the knight goes away, then it's time to run with the first pawn, threatening to promote. And if you go king h7, then the second pawn will come. So here you see what has been part of white's strategy for such a long time. It was a huge investment, but eventually the pawns, they are breaking through. That's why the move queen a6 is not recommendable for black. But anyway, black's position is already pretty bad. In the game, they follow the move queen to e8, offering the exchange of queens and covering this square. Now, exchanging the queens would not be such a great idea, but look at white's next move. Give yourself a time to think over what are the options. It's an absolutely amazing idea. Rook f7. It's a rook sacrifice, and this move was, we thought it was just impossible as the queen just covered that square. But after queen takes, the idea is that you give a check on c8. The queen has to interfere again. Your rook and 2 pieces down, but once again, the d pawn. It's threatening the queen. Taking on c8 allows white to get a new queen with check. And later on, this pawn proves to be very decisive. It's a beautiful attacking mechanism, and rather than taking on c8, there's not much you can do. Black decided to play king f7, give back the queen anyway. D takes e8, rook takes e8, and you do have this situation with a rook and 2 minor pieces versus the queen, which is in itself not that bad for black at all. But white is going to play in a very clever way and will try to promote its c-pawn. Queen b7 check. Now rook e7 is the most obvious move, trying to counter the check by attacking the queen. But now another amazing move here is the move c6. White says, you can take my queen, I'm going to take back with a pawn, and nothing can be done against the promotion of the b pawn, because these 2 pieces are simply too far away. Therefore, black tried to play a clever move, e4. And now you may think, what is the idea of this move? Well, if you just think, I'm going to take that pawn, all of a sudden, black is able to take, and the bishop can come to e5 with the idea of controlling the promotion square. And black is even winning. So the idea is to clear that square so the bishop can try to control this diagonal. But it's white's turn. White's playing c7 and the pawn is through. But the game is not over yet. e3 played. And if you would make a new queen now, you have 2 extra queens. It's e2 check. King has to take on f2. And then it's e1 queen with checkmate. It's actually black who is winning this time. So this pawn is very dangerous, and therefore white has to be very precise and start here with the move queen d5 check. So the idea is that if the king goes back to the 8 rank, then we promote with check. If you block with the rook, then we are able to take the rook, and after king takes, we get a new queen. So black has to go king f6. Now it's the move queen to d6 with check. And once again, if you go rook e6, it's queen takes e6, it's game over. Therefore, king f7 was played, and probably this was still time trouble. Players were trying to reach move 40 to get additional time to work out these complications. White decided to repeat the moves to reach that 40th move. King f6, queen d6, king f7, and now very precise liquidation. Queen takes e7, and after king takes e7, the pawn promotes. Still, you gotta deal with these two pawns. They may be a little bit unpleasant, but black is unable to deliver decisive threats. Bishop h6 was played to protect the pawn, but now there are a bunch of checks. Queen to c5. The king gotta go away. You're ready to pick up one of these pawns, but most importantly, we should give priority eliminating the pawns on f2 and e3. So king e8 was played, queen b5, hoping to capture the pawn on b4 with check, so black cannot go to d squares, king d8, and now queen b6, king to d7, and now instead we are capturing the pawn on g6, hitting both these pieces on the h-file. Black still tried this move, e2 check. Now be careful, if you take the pawn on e2, it's knight f4 with check, forking the king and queen, it's game over. Instead, king takes f2 was played, and now after bishop e3 is the final move. Don't take the bishop, as that would allow black to get a new queen. That would be such a bad idea. If you do take the pawn, it would be knight f4, and black is going to pick up the queen anyway, and therefore the only move here for white to win the game, it's the move king e1, and it's time to resign, because now white's king is safe, the pawn on e2 is no longer dangerous. If you play knight f4 to protect that pawn on e2, we simply have the move queen f7 check. After the king goes away, then something like g3 is absolutely good enough. Attacking the knight, after the knight moves, we can wrap up the pawn, and of course white has no difficulties to win with an extra queen. So therefore, after this amazing battle, black resigned in the position after the move king to e1. I thought this was a very impressive game and a big example of how to fight for the initiative. That once you sacrifice a piece, in order to maintain that initiative, you have to keep going, invest a second piece, maybe a third or even a fourth one. And in this game, even 7 piece sacrifices were seen. Something very unusual in chess, but definitely one of the most amazing games Grigori Serper has ever played. I hope you like this game. Make sure you like it. Give it a like, and of course subscribe to the channel, and we will be back very soon again.